Welcome to the meeting of the Turlock Subbasin's Technical Advisory Committees. On the screen here, you see a couple of the general ground rules that we've run by since we've been doing these Zoom meetings. Everyone's been really good at obeying them, so I'm not even going to go through them in this instance, with the exception of saying that we're recording the meeting, and it's we also have a public comment item coming up as well for those who wish to speak that are members of the public or anyone really who chooses to speak on any item not listed or listed on the agenda. And then meeting materials that we're going to be going over today are already on the turlockgroundwater.org website. And so you'll be able to get the presentation from Todd Groundwater is up there, and along with all the other associated materials. I believe that is it for me, and I will just hand it over to the powers that be and let them run their meeting.
Thank you, Herb. This is Michael Cook with Turlock Irrigation District. I'll chair the meetings today. And who's going to chair from the east side? Do we have anybody? I don't see Kevin on, so who's the vice chair for the East Turlock GSA TAC? Anybody want to volunteer?
Well, this is Walt. We don't really have one designated. I suppose I could handle it.
I'm just looking. Well, I don't see any action items for the East Turlock by itself. So I think we're going to be okay.
Okay.
Because this is a special meeting, not a regular meeting. So
yeah, we do have a quorum because I'm on. I see Dennis. I see Lacey. I don't see anybody from East Side or from Belico Cortez. I mean, Merced ID, but we do have a quorum.
Okay, so for the West Turlock, it's 2:03, and I can call this meeting to order because I see about Karen from CERES, Mike from Waterford, Herb, Debbie, me from TID, obviously you, Walt, Leandro from Delhi, David from Denair, and then Lacey and Brody from Merced County, and Allison Martin from Cedar Turlock. So that makes 7. So we do have a quorum on the west side. Okay, so that's the meeting called to order. Moving on to item number 4, public participation. This is the time set aside for members of the public to directly address the Technical Advisory Committee on any item of interest to the public that is in the subject matter of the TAC. So we also have an agenda. Is there anything for that's not on the agenda that someone would like to speak about right now? If so, please go ahead.
Michael, this is Milt Treeweiler, and I'd like to speak, please.
Go ahead, Milt.
TAC members and staff, Milt Treeweiler, Turlock citizen. After 75 years of life or age, I've come to the conclusion that we all think what we believe is the truth. We are so busy defending what we believe that we fail to be open-minded sometimes. Some of the things we believe are true, some of the things we believe are not true. What each one of us believes can't be all wrong, and it can't be all right. What science and scientists want to find is the truth. And if something they believe is false, they want to hear about it. The scientific method can be summarized in one sentence, quote, "Do whatever it takes to avoid fooling yourself into thinking something is true that is not true, or thinking that something is not true when that is true," end quote. And this is a quote from astrophysicist Neil Tyson. If there's something that Jeff Maroka said in his presentation on Earth's climate system that's not true, Jeff would like to know about it. Most scientists, but probably not all, are open-minded and realize everyone makes mistakes. And again, I'm just asking, would those of you who have not watched Jeff Maroka's presentation on Earth's climate system, please watch just the first 28 minutes to get the basic concepts. I have confidence that you will at least learn the basic science of global warming and climate change. He explained it in such a good, easy to understand manner. You can find his presentation on YouTube at Modesto Area Partners in Science, Climate Science Update. So what you do is you go to your YouTube program and you go to the search line and put in Modesto Area Partners in Science followed by Climate Science Update, and click the search. It'll bring up the Modesto Area Partners in Science programs. It may be the first or second program because they've had another program after the one he did. I hope everyone in this meeting today will try to be open-minded and wants to know about global warming and our Earth's climate system. This is very important for the Groundwater Sustainability Agency and the future of our valley. And Herb, I do ask again, if it's possible, if you could put that link of Jeff's program back up on the website. And thank you all for taking the 28 minutes to watch this first part and understand what climate change and global warming is all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Milt. Thank you for your comments. Anybody else want to participate in the public participation?
Hey, Michael, this is Kevin Coughlin. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, Kevin.
Thank you. And I want to thank Milt for that comment. And I have watched the video, and it's an interesting video. And I especially like that Jeff did a lot of his work at the University of Colorado, my alum as well. And it's a good video. I think Jeff's too much of an advocate, but it's a good video. It's good information, at least from Jeff's side. So, but thank you, Milt. I think turning us onto that video is always good information. Doesn't have a lot to do with what we're doing in the GSP, but it does give some background for what we need to do to prepare our GSP for global climate change. No doubt about it. So thanks, Milt. And Michael, the question I had for you is, I came on late. Do we have a quorum on the east side?
Yes, you do. And Walt kind of filled in for you a little bit there.
Oh, thanks, Walt. I appreciate it. Thank you. That's all I had to say.
Okay. Anything else on the public participation? Okay. Hearing nothing, we're on to item number 5. FSS funding to seek available state outreach funding. So this is to look at additional funds that may be available to help us with our public outreach efforts. So I hand it over to Herb. Is that you?
No, that's meeting.
Okay, someone needs to mute. Someone's over talking here. Hi, mute. I think you're on. You need to go on mute. There you go. Thank you. All right, Herb, over to you. Herb, you need to get off mute.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, Michael. So real quickly, because I know we noted it on the agenda and it's relevant to the conversation, I'm just going to put up on my screen here this very high-tech list of the things that we've done to date, to my knowledge, related to groundwater outreach. They're listed there. We have our website. We send mails. We have some 350 people on our interested parties list, and we'll send out regular mails to them and newsletters. Social media, which includes YouTube. The biggest thing I think we've done thus far to get people interested is the Sigma in the Turlock Subbasin video that's up on YouTube. It's a 5-minute Sigma 101 for the Turlock Subbasin, been very well received. Videos of meetings that we have, including this one, and others, promotional videos promoting our events, and then, you know, TAC meetings and GSA meetings also serve as outreach opportunities. We've held 5 community workshops, in addition to many, probably I can't even name the number of technical workshops that have been done at the TAC meetings, but at least 5 community outreach-based workshops. And we had 3 groundwater lunch hours, and we have another one coming on March, not 36th. I could probably even do that here while we're in here so I could change it. March 26th, we'll be having another one. And that's the general crux of what we've done thus far. I'm going to share another screen here. In talking a little bit with our people at DWR, who we've been working with on a lot of different things, we found out that there is facilitation support services funding available. And we've utilized that in the past for our subbasin, and it's been used successfully. And so now, given light that a lot of times we're getting to the nitty-gritty part of the outreach budget for the GSP, we are looking to ask for some of that funding again, which is available. And so after talking a little bit with Debbie and having an informal conversation with Amanda with DWR, we kind of realized it'd be good to get before the TAC and kind of present a list of things we're looking to ask for of the department when we go to apply for the Facilitation Support Services, or FSS funding. So I have a list here. I've only went over, I think Debbie and I've looked at it and maybe a few others, but I wanted to present it to the TAC and see if there's anything else that we can add to it. The scope for this funding is narrow. We just don't get a pot of money and get to do what we want. We have to kind of keep it within DWR's scope. And they would hire, they facilitate, or their facilitators, they have a contractor they use that they would put us in touch with, and we would work with them. So the number one thing here is 2 more. I said we had community meetings. We're looking to see if we can get funding to coordinate or facilitate 2 more community meetings. One potentially in June, July, as you see here for meeting 1, and one in late September for meeting 2. And you'll see that subsides or coincides with various points in the GSP comment period and the chapters or sections that are getting rolled out for the GSP. And so we would look to try and utilize the timing there for those 2 meetings to share what's in the GSP, the draft GSP, and also to get feedback on those items. So that's one thing we'd be asking for, helping for coordination in addition to TAC staff, coordination for those 2 meetings. Also, I mentioned we hold these groundwater lunch hours. They're pretty easy to turn them over quickly, but it's nice to have facilitation for that. And so we're looking to see if we could have facilitation provided for that as well on the back end. I crossed out here, we found out later or earlier this week that Spanish translation is not something that's within the scope of DWR, although they do provide translation services for documents, but not for like live meetings. So I crossed that out from our potential ask list. Another thing that we noticed from the Modesto Subbasin, who has applied or is planning to apply for FSS funding, is a GSP adoption toolkit could be of help. Around the time the GSP is set to be adopted, if we have a toolkit available for TAC members and for various stakeholders in the public that goes over things that need to be done, various fact sheets or talking points on the GSP, and can be done in multiple languages, that'd be helpful in order to get support for the GSP and to also educate for the GSP. And so that's something we're looking to ask for as well. And lastly, the Modesto Subbasin had asked for some recorded videos. It's not just something where they just let us do whatever we want. There's some certain stipulations we have to follow, but we are looking to ask for some recorded videos to be taped or to be recorded. We would provide the talent. I think that's what the Modesto Subbasin had been asking for with the videos they're proposing to do. So TAC staff would be the people who narrate or record, or if we want to use our consultants or anyone else that we're currently using, that's fine. But DWR would be or would contract out, and they would provide the production services and the post-production services to get the video complete. And so that's something we could ask for too. And so all that being said, I wanted to get these things before, and I could send this document out to TAC members too after the fact or have it sent out. But we wanted to say these are the things for the remainder of 2021 we think that are based within the scope of what DWR allows for their FSS funding that we think we could ask for. It's not like asking for a grant. We don't have to be very, very specific. Once we apply, we'll work with DWR to get things where they need to be and to figure out all the details. But we're thinking possible videos, possible toolkit, facilitation for lunch hours, and facilitation for 2 more Turlock Subbasin community meetings. Those 4 things we're thinking of asking for. And so I will pause there and ask to see if TAC members have any ideas now for things in terms of outreach that we might be able to ask for within the scope of the services that DWR offers. And I know that other Debbie may also chime in a little bit. She's been working a little bit with Amanda over the past few years, and if she has any thoughts to add, because her and I both kind of worked on this together, leave that to Debbie as well. And so, any other thoughts? Any things to add as far as how we're going to best outreach to our stakeholders for the GSP and GSP comment period specifically moving forward in 2021? And I'll pause and have a sip of coffee.
That's an airplane. Yeah, this is Kevin. Herb, great presentation. I would just add, you know, we've been talking recently about responding to comments to the draft portions of the GSP. So I don't know if that's something that facilitation can help or would be eligible, but I would add that to the list.
Thank you, Kevin. This is Debbie. Yeah, I don't know if that is an option, facilitating, helping to you know, respond to comments. I don't think that they would be able to develop the responses, but maybe kind of there might be some assistance in the facilitation of that process that they might be able to do. So that's a good catch. I just wanted to add, thank you, Herb. This is great. And the only thing I wanted to add is that in the most recent correspondence with Amanda, she clarified that the first step for this process will be to apply for SSS funding. Not the specific ask, but there's an application for getting into the process. And then once that has been approved, then you work with DWR on the specifics of the work plan, and this would fold into that process. And so I think the request today, so I think there's additional time to continue to develop this if there's interest in other people kind of providing additional ideas. And I think the ask today was specific to kind of giving the nod to go ahead and submit that initial application, if I'm correct. Is that right, Herb?
That's a good clarification. That's right. I remember Amanda mentioning that as well. And yeah, and regardless, you know, so like people can come up with ideas today. You know, it's not like we have to, you know, today they're saying yes to these 4 things and nothing else. There's some time, as you mentioned, Debbie, to be able to say, hey, we applied and now we're working with them. You know, remember the list we talked about a couple of weeks back or a month back? Now we're going to start to work with them on that. So it's going to be iterative. Like I said, it's not like a grant. It's a little bit less restrictive, but we still have a process we need to follow. So if I'm not sure functionally for the meeting today, if what type of formal action needs to be taken so that we move forward, we would work with the ad hoc committee, the ad hoc communications committee / work group that's been meeting sporadically. Myself and Kevin and Brandon they're also, and anyone else who really wants to join and be part of that committee would work on stuff on the back end to coordinate with the department. And so if blessed today to apply, then you would hear more from us in the future. But also at the same point in time, we're also looking to get your ideas over the next few weeks too for things that might be good to ask for.
Herb, this is Kevin again. If I could add in, it's more of a question, I guess. Would the TSS application that we made for the groundwater monitoring wells suffice for this process as well?
I think it's a different application process. It's probably might even be the same process we went through 2 years ago when we asked for FSS funding, but it's different than the TSS, the technical funding, if I recall. And DWR's voiced that they're happy to have one of their representatives from the region to go through the application process with us if needed too. but it's pretty short if I recall. I haven't looked at the application since we did it 2 years ago, but it was very quick and very narrative, if I recall. You just kind of put in some narrative,
Okay.
open-ended.
Fair enough. And that's what I remember about the TSS application as well, is it was really online and it was a fairly quick, easy process. And then they got back to you as far as what you actually wanted to get completed. But if you need a motion from both the east and the west, I think the east side would be ready to make a recommendation.
Any other questions for Herb? Thanks for that, Kevin. Any questions for Herb? Herb, I said the one question, the level of effort for the team put the FSS application in, is it relatively straightforward, and is there any additional out-of-pocket costs for that?
Yeah, it's straightforward. You probably have staff that's on this call right now working, to create it, edit it, and send it in, and then to inform this body. Probably no more than a couple of days with existing resources that we're already using.
Sounds good. And I don't know if Valerie can even remember. Can we do one motion as one joint TAC, or does it have to be two separate motions, east and west?
You guys are different bodies, so you kind of have to do two different, just in case you would vote separately or differently.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
I know
No,
it's going.
no problem. And it's good because we have now 9 members from the West Turlock on, so we have more than our 7 people. So we're in good shape. So Kevin, you kind of started this at east side. You want to take a vote first?
Sure. Walt or Dennis, want to make the motion?
Dennis, I'll move to go forward.
I'll second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? It was moved, by the way, by Dennis, seconded by Walt. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
No, second by Tom.
That was not Walt, that was Hisham.
Oh, that was Hisham. Thank you, Hisham, for the second.
Right.
Oh, so anybody opposed? Sounds like our motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And then for the West Turlock Subbasin GSA TAC, I have a motion to approve the action.
So moved.
That's Curtis from Hillmar.
I will second.
And that's
Yeah,
Leandro from Delhi.
Yeah.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. Opposed? Abstain? Okay, we approve that motion unanimously. So thank you, Herb, and thank you, everybody, for doing that. It never hurts to apply for additional state funding.
Thank you. Yeah.
Go ahead, Herb. Okay. Okay, moving on to item number 6, sustainable management criteria, land subsidence. So Liz from Todd Groundwater is going to lead us through some technical information related to developing minimum thresholds and monitoring strategies for the land subsidence sustainable management criteria. Okay, Liz, over to you.
Michael. So I'm going to share my screen and go through a presentation that we have prepared. And if you could let me know if you can see it, that would be helpful.
It's up.
It's up. Great. Okay. So thanks everyone for joining this afternoon. I am going to talk about the sustainable management criteria for land subsidence. And my presentation has 3 different parts. The first part, I am going to review some land subsidence information that we have seen before in previous TAC meetings and that we have also included in our draft GSP basin setting section. And then I'm going to talk about the land subsidence minimum threshold technical recommendation and potential GSP monitoring wells to monitor for land subsidence. And conclude with discussing land subsidence monitoring strategies. I'll try to pause after each of these sections to see if anybody has questions, but also please feel free to shout out and interrupt me as I go along. Interrupt anytime you want. So getting started, a review of land subsidence. So you've all heard of Lake Corcoran and the Corcoran clay, but I'll repeat it here. So Lake Corcoran is an ancient lake that covered the Central Valley, particularly the San Joaquin Valley. And the Corcoran clay was created because of deposits from this lake on the bottom of the lake, mostly silts and clays. And Corcoran clay is a regional aquitard. And it's the depressurization and the dewatering of the Corcoran clay that's the primary cause of land subsidence in the San Joaquin Valley. Here's a conceptual diagram of land subsidence. So on the left-hand side is sort of a view of beneath the ground surface before land subsidence, and on the right is after land subsidence. And what I've labeled here is the unconfined aquifer, the Corcoran clay, and the confined aquifer. In general, the aquifers are coarse-grained, although of course they're heterogeneous. This is a very simplified picture. But the aquifers are generally sand and gravel, coarse-grained materials, and the Corcoran clay is generally silts and clays. And so when you install a well that's screened above the Corcoran clay, what you're measuring is the water level, the water table, right, in the unconfined aquifer. But when you install a well that's in the confined aquifer below the Corcoran clay and you measure the water level in that well, what you're measuring is the potentiometric surface, or the pressure of the water at that point. And as the potentiometric surface of the confined aquifer decreases, the pore pressure between the grains of the sediments in both the sands and gravels and in the clays and silts decreases. But the pore pressures within the Corcoran clay decreases, especially if the potentiometric surface falls below the top of the Corcoran clay. Now, let's just say the potentiometric surface is above the Corcoran clay and decreases a little bit, but remains above the Corcoran clay. In that scenario, the pore pressure within the Corcoran clay decreases, right? Because the pressure decreases. And it's possible that the grains, the silts and clays can start rearranging because the pore pressure between the grains starts to decrease. But we don't know if that's going to trigger, if that's going to kind of set in motion land subsidence. What we do know for sure is that if that potentiometric surface drops below the top of the Corcoran clay, it can lead to compaction of the Corcoran clay because the silts and clay grains, the grains of material, start to realign and you lose storage, and that causes the ground surface to sink, and that's what subsidence is. So here is a figure that shows land subsidence throughout the San Joaquin Valley. In general, land subsidence has not been a significant issue or really much of an issue in the Turlock Subbasin. Most of the land subsidence that's been measured in the San Joaquin Valley is south of the Turlock Subbasin. But there is, of course, risk of land subsidence in the Turlock Subbasin, and that's because we have Corcoran clay in the Turlock Subbasin. So if that Corcoran clay is depressurized or dewatered, you can induce land subsidence. But this land subsidence can be avoided if the groundwater levels are maintained above the top of the clay in both of these western principal aquifers. Here's a map that shows some results of monitoring that was done, land subsidence monitoring that was done by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation as part of the San Joaquin River Restoration Program. They have about 70 GPS monitoring points that are shown as black triangles here. And one of those monitoring points is in the Turlock Subbasin, just south of the city of Turlock. And they measured these GPS stations twice a year, July and December, between 2011 and 2019, and then only once in 2020. And in the Turlock Subbasin, at that one monitoring point, it showed that between 2012 and 2018, the land subsided 0.04 feet per year, which is a half an inch per year. And then between 2017 and 2018, that accelerated a little bit, and the subsidence was 1.8 inches per year at that one station. This is a map of INSAR data from DWR. So INSAR data is satellite data I think they're European satellites that are measuring the ground surface elevations and the vertical displacement. And DWR has contracted with a company called Tre Altamira to process this data and makes this data available on their Sigma website. So this is a map that shows the vertical displacement that was measured with INSAR between June 2015 and September 2019. As you can see in the Western Subbasin, the gray colors, there was zero subsidence, zero change in land surface elevation. Throughout most of the subbasin, it was between 0 and 0.6 inches, which is the yellow color. And then the maximum that was measured was between 1.8 and 2.4. And we see that sort of right here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but right here on the edge of the Corcoran Clay between Delhi and Balico. And we see that in some spots in the Eastern Subbasin. So I just want to put these numbers in context for you because I think it's important to keep a context here. So most of Turlock Subbasin, again, is less than 0.6 inches during this 4-year period, which is less than 0.15 inches per year, which is just so little. And the maximum, 1.8 to 2.4, averages out to be about 0.6 inches per year. So for comparison, the Merced Subbasin had 9 inches per year of subsidence, which is 15 times the rate that we are seeing in Turlock. And so I think what we also need to keep in mind here is that INSAR data is relatively new, and it's an excellent and useful screening tool, but the data also needs to be ground truthed because as we have seen working on the Kern GSP, that some of the INSAR data doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and some does. So I'm not trying to sweep it under the rug, but I think it needs to be, from what we've seen, we think it needs to be ground truth.
Hey, Liz, this is Lacey McBride with Merced County.
Hi.
Hi. So on that map that we're looking at right now, you just described, I have a clarifying question. You just described subsidence in relation to the Corcoran Clay, but it looks like there's some vertical displacement in the eastern portion of the basin that's outside of the Corcoran Clay. So how does that work when you see the movement that's not related to the Corcoran Clay? Is that not land subsidence? Is that something else?
Well, it could be, right? Because there are two types of land subsidence. There's elastic and inelastic. And apart from subsidence, there could also be other land use changes. So I'll try to describe inelastic and elastic. So elastic subsidence is what happens more typically in coarse-grained material, where coarse-grained material is dewatered, the grains collapse a little bit, but then when that's rewatered, the pressures build up again and the land can actually come back up. So it's elastic. It bounces back up. Inelastic is more common with fine-grained material, and it's more common, with the Corcoran Clay, where once those grains collapse, it's much harder for those grains to sort of re-water and for that to repressurize and to bounce back up. So that's why it's called inelastic. So we don't know what's causing subsidence in the east. We don't know if for sure this is real, what we're seeing, or if it's a change in land surface from maybe plowing, or it could be some changes in land surface from the compaction of the coarser grain materials, which would be elastic, or it could be some collapse of finer grained lenses of material. But we know that, again, in the San Joaquin Valley, most of the subsidence is associated with the Corcoran because this is a regional, continuous, fine-grained unit. We know we don't have regional, continuous, fine-grained units in the east, so we don't think it's any sort of like systemic subsidence caused by the dewatering of fine-grained material. So the answer to your question is we don't really know, it's something that we can keep our eye on and continue to monitor in the future.
Liz, I had a quick question. This is Milt.
Hi.
In this east side area, now you have the soil types for all of this area, so you would know if there were clay soils in the surface. Would these clay soils have to be down in the bottom part like the Corcoran clay is, or could those clay surfaces be at the top of the surface?
Yeah, I mean, it could also be, you know, well, I mean, the clay surfaces at the surface would not be within the water table, right? But you could have sort of shrinking and swelling of surface clays based on how much it rains and how recently it rained, right? So that's yes, that's another possibility.
Thank you.
And just to keep this sort of in perspective, like the amount of change that we're seeing here is really, really minimal. And so, you know, we're not yet sure how accurate this data are. So that's why, you know, when we are discussing it, I just want to make the point that we really think this needs to be ground truthed. This is a really good data to use as screening, but we can't just hang our hat and say, okay, we're done. This is what's happening. We need to sort of follow up and ground truth this.
Hey, Liz, this is Walt.
Hey, Walt.
Looking through the regs, you know, in and of itself, subsidence isn't really the concern. It's the rate and extent of subsidence that substantially interferes with surface land uses.
Right.
If we even try to make that linkage to a substantial interference of a surface land use, I mean, are we talking there about bridges, infrastructure, foundations, pipelines? I mean, what is the linkage? You know, say we were concerned, I don't think we are, but say we were concerned with subsidence in and of itself, what is the substantial interference with the surface land use? What should we be thinking of?
You're exactly right. It's the interference with infrastructure, like you said, canals, pipelines, roadways, foundations. And, you know, the Turlock Subbasin so far has not reported any sort of interference with infrastructure. And so you'll see in a couple slides ahead of this, that because of that, we're not seeing, even if there is subsidence, you know, we're not sure how much there is, but we're not seeing any undesirable results related to subsidence. And that's sort of the, that's sort of the term that we will be using, undesirable result. And if we're not seeing any impacts to infrastructure or roadways, pipelines, et cetera, we're not seeing undesirable results related to subsidence. And that's been the case in Turlock Subbasin. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it sure does. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Okay, so this is a cross-section that we have in our basin setting section of the GSP. And this transect line kind of runs down through the center of the subbasin from west to east. And it shows the Corcoran clay and the aquifer above it, the unconfined western upper principal aquifer, and the aquifer below it, the western lower principal aquifer. And a couple slides ago, I said, you know, we should really try, in order to avoid land subsidence, we should try to keep the water levels or the potentiometric surface in both aquifers above the top of the Corcoran clay. Well, let's start with the western upper principal aquifer. The water levels, which again is the unconfined water table, have historically been above the Corcoran clay. And there's really little risk of getting those water levels down to the top of the Corcoran clay. Because in essence, if the water levels in the western upper principal aquifer got to the bottom of the Corcoran clay, we'd essentially be dewatering the unconfined aquifer, which is not going to happen. The concern in terms of water levels is what's happening below the Corcoran in the western lower principal aquifer, the potentiometric surface. Again, the declining water levels below the Corcoran could result in Corcoran clay compaction. And so that's why we want to use the water levels from the confined aquifer as a proxy for direct subsidence monitoring. And I also want to point out the confined, the Corcoran clay here. I don't know, can someone give me a thumbs up? Can you see my cursor here?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is the edge of the Corcoran clay. And the Corcoran clay dips to the west and it gets deeper. Now, I just want to focus on, because this, and I can come back, flip back to the slide again, but at the edge of the Corcoran clay, so again, think of this as Lake Corcoran that was sitting in the San Joaquin Valley before. And so the edges of the lake are thinner than they are in kind of the center of the lake, because again, these are deposits that were deposited on the bottom of the lake, the silts and clays. So the edges of the deposits are thinner, and you also see some fingering of coarse grain deposits followed by more Corcoran clay. And so there's sort of on the edges of the lake, there's some erosion that happened, right? You can just imagine like little streams running into the lake that carried with it some coarse grain materials and kind of dissected the Corcoran clay. So the edges of the Corcoran clay are not as solid and competent of a unit as they are, you know, further to the west. So I just want you to keep that in mind as I go through the slides ahead. And also keep in mind also that this steep dip here, this area here is around the city of Turlock, and just to the edge of the city of Turlock, the Corcoran clay is pretty steep, dips pretty steeply to the west and gets a lot deeper very quickly. So keeping that in mind, I'm going to go ahead, and this will come back in a few slides, not right away. And I can always flip back to it. So this is the definition of undesirable results that Phyllis presented to the TAC in September, during the September TAC meeting. And the definition is significant and unreasonable inelastic land subsidence that adversely affects land use or reduces the viability of the use of critical infrastructure. Undesirable results will be evidenced by an exceedance of minimum thresholds expressed as groundwater elevations at representative monitoring points based on the top of the Corcoran clay with a buffer at the land subsidence monitoring locations measured in 2 consecutive spring monitoring events. And water level monitoring will be supplemented by ongoing screening data, such as INSAR, the Bureau of Reclamation benchmarks that I pointed out, there's one in Turlock, and other means such as GPS monitoring stations, extensometers, etc. And I think what's really important to keep in mind here is that, you know, and we talked about this a second ago when Walt asked his question, was that undesirable results relating to inelastic land subsidence is not occurring and has not occurred in the Turlock Subbasin. So moving on to the next section, does anybody have any questions so far?
Well, a comment, Liz and Mike Day.
Hi.
There was, you know, critical infrastructure to be determined. Certainly we've watched in the South Valley, you know, the Bryant Current Canal, the California Aqueduct, the CCIDs, canals, bridges. You know, we've seen, those are the things, and it's a big deal. You know, you lose critical capacity. And so, you know, if you're looking for stuff to overlay for where it might happen, that's the kind of stuff that you overlay.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, thank you. And I will point out that a lot of those infrastructure that you just noted are in areas where the subsidence has been much, 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 much greater than what we've seen in the Subbasin. But you're right. But you're absolutely right. We need to keep an eye on where potential subsidence might be happening and where the critical infrastructure is within the subbasin, roadways, canals, etc. So thank you. Anybody else? Okay, I'll move on. So now I'm going to talk about the land subsidence minimum threshold and GSP monitoring wells. So here is our technical recommendation for the minimum threshold. We recommend that the minimum threshold for land subsidence is the groundwater elevation measured at representative monitoring wells screened below the Corcoran clay that coincides with the elevation of the top of the Corcoran clay. We recommend that the measurable objective be set a distance above the Corcoran clay to allow for a buffer before the MT is reached. So hitting the MO, measurable objective, does not trigger an undesirable result, but hitting the MO could trigger a management action to avoid the MT. Such as if you see water levels declining and hitting the MO, maybe you think about reducing the pumping in the area so that you don't continue to draw down water levels and potentially hit the MT. But the purpose of today's meeting is to really talk about the minimum threshold, not the MO. The MO and the associated potential management action will be selected for the land subsidence monitoring wells after we determine the MT. The MO will consider the depth of the MT and water level fluctuations as available. And when I was thinking about this, putting this presentation together, I just started thinking about this like a traffic light. You know, when you're looking at water levels, if the water levels are above the MO, you're in the green, you're okay. You don't have to worry. But when you set an MO and you see that the water levels hit that MO or dive below the MO, that's sort of like a warning, you know, hey guys, you know, step back, slow down, think about what's happening, why it might be happening, and, you know, potentially implement a management action that could halt that decline in potentiometric surface. Because the idea here is to avoid running through the red light. You don't want to get below the MT.
But Liz,
Yeah.
does the MT here, if the potentiometric surface did reach the MT, does that mean undesirable result, or yet do we still have to see the significant impact to the surface land use?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, not necessarily. I mean, we know that if the potentiometric surface is below the top of the Corcoran, it could cause land subsidence. And we know that land subsidence could cause problems to infrastructure. So it's not necessarily that we're seeing an undesirable result in terms of problems with infrastructure, but it's kind of a level to avoid because, you know, land subsidence, the dynamics of land subsidence there's a time lag. It's not going to happen immediately, right? Yeah. So you just want to protect yourself by staying above that MT.
And they're irreversible.
Right, because it's inelastic, right?
Right.
Right.
Liz, I have a question. This is Valerie Kincaid.
Hi.
Hi. So is this MT based on groundwater elevation kind of like not really an MT, but like a flag? Because I know the regs require minimum thresholds be set at different levels. And for subsidence, they talk about the rate of subsidence. So I'm wondering, I mean, at first I kind of thought that we were using maybe groundwater elevations as a proxy.
Yes.
But it sounds like we're not. Can you just explain why we're not using a rate? I assume we're not using a rate because we don't have a real rate that is measurable. But then it leads me to think that we're using this as a proxy, and there are of course different requirements if you're using groundwater elevations as a proxy rather than rates.
So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We are using it as a proxy because we have not seen a lot of subsidence, so we don't know what rates there are. You know, there hasn't been a lot of subsidence here. I know Merced Subbasin is using rates because they have much greater subsidence than we do. So
go ahead. Sorry.
No. What you said is right. We are intending to use the water levels as a proxy for trying to avoid subsidence by keeping that potentiometric surface above the top of the Corcoran clay.
And so is the concept that we would use the same representative monitoring sites as groundwater elevation and the same MTs and MOs as our elevation?
I don't think so. No, I think this is different. And sort of the next part of the presentation, I'm going to talk about the monitoring wells that we have and that we will have in the future that are screened below the Corcoran clay, and what we know about those locations, where the Corcoran is and where groundwater elevations are. And so I think that the candidate wells for land subsidence monitoring will be different, or a subset of for water levels, and they won't necessarily be the same MTs, right? So it's going to be a separate set for land subsidence.
Yeah, we'll have to be careful about how we write it so it doesn't look like we're just using a different metric. If we're not really using the same MTs, it's not really a proxy. So we'll have to explain why we're not using rates and why we're not using an exact. I mean, usually when I think of proxies, I think of it as, you're using the same, you're just saying we're using the exact same thing we're doing over there in elevations, but we know it'll tell us if there's a subsidence problem over here. We know that because of this technical write-up. So we'll have to pay attention to that.
Yeah, and we also, to add, and this is another thing that we'll discuss today, is that, the future monitoring is going to be using water levels, but also other means too, right? We're going to be using the INSAR data that we have. We're going to be using that Bureau of Reclamation monitoring point. And we can also install GPS monitoring points in sensitive areas, extensometers. So it's not going to be just water levels that we use to keep an eye on what's going on. But at this point in time, it's the best information that we have. And from a technical standpoint, we understand sort of the physics of land subsidence and what the risks are and what can cause it. And so we know that if we can keep the potentiometric surface above the top of the Corcoran, we're in better shape than if we draw it below the top of the Corcoran.
Yeah.
And maybe we write it in a way that talks about being aware of rates, but maybe using even, phrasing it as we're being more protective than using a rate. And this is why we're doing a good job or a better job of looking at that. And if we ever have a rate that we see, maybe we use that just so DWR doesn't see this and say, we told you to use a rate and you didn't, and we don't think, but yet you're not using this as a proxy. So just make sure that we're explaining we're being more protective, and we will understand if there is a rate that comes online.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
So, hi, this is Debbie.
Hi, Debbie.
Thank you, Valerie. I think that's really helpful. I do think it's important that we incorporate into the text of the GFP the other mechanisms we're planning on using and how they relate to how we're going to be evaluating, what's happening and how it kind of aligns with whatever management actions we might have and that sort of thing. And so I see this as an integral part of our process for evaluating subsidence and implementing whatever actions, And so the water levels are one thing, and I do think, or I would hope that the wells that we choose to use for this may be a subset of the wells that we're going to use for other things. That it's not just going to be, subsidence and nothing else. It would be helpful to integrate it if at all possible. And because we have so few monitoring specific wells, that I think that would be helpful. But yeah, so thank you very much for kind of talking about that, because I do think that's a part of the process. And quite frankly, maybe we even go so far as to say that in the future, as we become more familiar with, or there is additional data and facilities in place to monitor and manage subsidence based on those, we may, adjust our mechanism in the future to adapt over time. So it doesn't have to be the end all tell all. It's a starting place.
Yep, I think that's a really, really good point. In fact, I was on the Modesto TAC meeting yesterday, and Amanda from DWR, I think made a really, I don't know if she's on, Amanda, I'm not sure if she's on the call today.
She might have to be a little late.
Okay, she made what I thought was a really good point, and that is we're going to be doing 5-year updates for this GSP, right? And she said that DWR expects that GSPs will be reevaluating their MTs and how they came up with their MTs in 5 years. Because here we are, this is the starting point. This is our first cut at this plan. And, we're going to see how it works out. We're going to see what happens over the next 5 years. And when we update this in 5 years, we'll have so much more information. And I think this is really applicable to the subsidence issue, because we don't have a lot of information right now. And we'll continue to add to kind of the information that we have over the next few years, and we can adjust if we need to. So at this point, we're taking our best guess based on technical information, you know, not really a guess, but just based on the technical information we have, trying to come up with a reasonable MT to move forward at this point. And also to your point, and we'll get into this a little more shortly, I definitely think, you know, that we will definitely, you know, the wells that we're going to be using for the land subsidence water level monitoring, we would like to be monitoring wells. And so those monitoring wells will also be used for water level MT and MO and other things. So they're not, the subset of wells that we're going to be talking about is not just isolated to land subsidence. We'll be using them for other things as well. So thanks for making that point. So this takes us into wells. So it was a perfect segue. So again, when we're thinking about what wells to use for evaluating the potentiometric surface, we are wanting to use monitoring wells, not pumping wells. And so the question is, what monitoring wells do we have in the subbasin that are screened below the Corcoran? And we know that there are 5 existing monitoring wells screened below the Corcoran, and there are 3 future wells planned, and maybe more below the Corcoran. And so the existing 5 wells are these 2 orange dots. These are both multi-completion wells that were installed in the city of Turlock. They also installed a 3rd one, but that one is somewhere right around here, so outside of the Corcoran. So we're not focused on that now. We want to focus on the ones that are within the Corcoran. There's one in Denair, there's one in CERES, and there's one in near the Merced River that the USGS installed. There are also, we have Prop 68 funding to do several projects, one of which is installing monitoring wells throughout the subbasin. We're planning on 3 wells in the eastern subbasin and 2 multi-depth wells in the west. And these 3 red dots here are 3 potential locations that we're looking at for Prop 68 wells. At each of these locations, we are proposing to construct a well that's screened above the Corcoran and a well that's screened below the Corcoran. So 2 wells at each location. And so we're going to pick 2 of these 3 for Prop 68. And the other one that we don't pick is going to be, we're going to propose using TSS funding to install that well. And there's also interest, and we've just started discussing it. And if you'll remember looking at the INSAR data, there was this little area right here between Delhi and the edge of the Corcoran clay where we saw the maximum subsidence within the Corcoran. And so we've also been talking recently about maybe, you know, using TSS funding in the future for installing a well below the Corcoran in this area. But we haven't, you know, we have not picked a specific location, which is why I don't have that on the map here. So I'm going to go through each of these well locations and kind of tell you what I know about them. This little map that you see shows the red dot of where the well is located. And this is the CERES SMYRNA Park multi-completion well. This hydrograph that I'm showing shows the water levels that have been collected at this well. This well was constructed with 4 different screen intervals, all below the Corcoran clay. Water levels were measured in 2012, and then again between 2016 and 2020. And the different lines that you're seeing on the chart are the different elevations for each of the different screens. So there are 4 different screens, 4 different elevations at each time. I'm also showing here the ground surface elevation at the top and the elevation of the top of the Corcoran here, based on the log that we looked at from this well. So you can see here that the lowest water level, which is here and pretty close here, like in 2017 and 2018, these lowest water levels are about 25 feet above the top of the Corcoran clay. And again, we're proposing that the top of the Corcoran clay be the minimum threshold. But again, we're not here to decide on the measurable objective today, but I wanted to show you sort of an example. We could put a measurable objective where I've drawn it here, about 20 feet above the top of the Corcoran, or the minimum threshold. And again, going back to the traffic light, we hit the measurable objective. It's kind of like, okay, let's slow down. Let's think about what's happening and potentially implement a management action that could slow down this decline in water levels. So because we want to avoid hitting the minimum threshold. And there's about a 20-foot gap here. The next well is the Turlock multi-completion well called Ferrer Ranch Park. This was constructed very close to the edge of the Corcoran clay. Again, the Corcoran clay thins out towards the edge, but at this location, the Corcoran clay is about 15 feet thick. There are 4 screens that are below the Corcoran clay, and water levels have only been measured twice. Once in 2018, I think 2018 was shortly, I think they measured the static levels shortly after the well was constructed. And then again last week, because Sean over at Wood Rogers, who's on our GSP team, he actually installed these wells, and he was nice enough to run out there and measure the water levels for us last week. And what these water levels show, again, each of these different colored dots are the different water levels in each of the different screens at these 2 different times. And this lowest water level right here, which was measured last week, is about 28 feet above the top of the clay. So remember when I showed you that cross-section that showed how the Corcoran clay elevation dipped pretty steeply outside of Turlock? Well, this is the chart I just showed you, and the top of Corcoran here is at about 6 feet below sea level. And I'm going to flip to the next slide. This well is another Turlock multi-completion on the kind of southwestern edge of Turlock. And here, the top of Corcoran elevation is 80 feet below sea level. So this is, kind of we're seeing the effect of that deepening of the Turlock, of the Corcoran clay. So this well was completed with 3 different screen intervals below the Corcoran, and water levels again were measured in 2017 and again last week. And the lowest water level is about 114 feet above the top of the Corcoran clay. So very, very comfortably very comfortably above the Corcoran clay. This is the Denair nested well number 11. It's located right on the eastern edge of the Corcoran. And I looked at the log, and it looks like there's about, the Corcoran clay is about 22 feet thick. But right in the middle of it, there's about a 2-foot sand lens, coarse material. And this is sort of what I was talking about earlier on the edges of the Corcoran clay. It's less competent and less, solid. It's a little more heterogeneous, and that's what we're seeing here. But this well was constructed with 3 screens below the Corcoran, and David Odom actually was nice enough to go out there last week and measure the water level. And it's the only water level measurement that we have in this well. And that's these dots over here, and they are, water level was about 13 feet above the top of the Corcoran clay. So what we're seeing is on the edge of the Corcoran clay, water levels are much closer, the potentiometric surface, is much closer to the top of the Corcoran clay than when we move to the west and the Corcoran clay deepens. And we've seen that in this well. We saw that in the Turlock well that's close to the edge of the Corcoran, and the CERES. So the next well is a USGS multi-completion well. In the mid-2000s, USGS did a study, and they installed 3 different clusters of wells, different distances away from the river. I think they installed, I forget the exact number, somewhere between like 10 and 15 wells total.
I'm missing one.
Okay,
It'll be our cluster well.
Hello? anybody have a question?
I think that was just Dave Odom. Maybe he was weighing in on the wells. I don't know. Maybe he accidentally unmuted.
Nope, that was an accident.
Oh, okay. So the USGS well, so again, USGS installed several different clusters of wells for a study that they were doing. Almost all but one of them were installed above the Corcoran. And this is the one well that was installed below the Corcoran. And it's right next to the Merced River. USGS measured water levels between 2004 and 2005. And the lowest water level that we have record of that was collected is about 67 feet above the top of the Corcoran clay. So comfortably above the Corcoran clay. So the next few slides are the future wells that we're proposing for Prop 68. So there, again, there are 3 potential locations. We're going to choose 2 of them for Prop 68, 1 of them for TSS. And this is the first one. It's just west of Ceres, southwest of Ceres. And we don't have information at this location yet, right? Because we didn't construct the well, we didn't drill the well yet. But we looked at nearby DWR logs. And based on nearby DWR logs, the depth of the top of the Corcoran is about 160 feet, which corresponds to an elevation of about 86 feet in sea level. The estimated groundwater elevation during the drought in October 2015, based on measured data, is somewhere between 20 and 30 feet mean sea level. So the groundwater elevation, or the potentiometric surface below the Corcoran, is more than 100 feet above the top of the Corcoran clay here. Moving to the south, this location is west of the city of Turlock. Again, based on nearby DWR logs, we think the top of the Corcoran is around 170 feet deep, corresponding to an elevation of about 96 feet mean sea level. Groundwater elevations that were measured in October 2015 during the drought are somewhere between 20 and 30 feet mean sea level. So we are more than 115 feet above the top of the Corcoran clay here, the potentiometric surface. And the last potential location is west of Hillmar. And based on nearby logs, the depth of the top of Corcoran is probably around 175, which corresponds to an elevation of about 100 feet mean sea level. We don't have any wells screened below the Corcoran that are close by where we have water levels from. But based on the groundwater elevations that we're seeing in the west of the Western Lower Principal Aquifer, the groundwater elevations are comfortably above the Corcoran clay. And again, this area here between Delhi and the edge of the Corcoran clay is an area where we're also going to look at potentially installing a well using TSS funding in the future. So does anybody have any questions before I move on?
Yeah, Liz?
Yeah.
This is Michael.
Hi.
It's a good presentation. So I'm kind of going back to kind of the comment Lacey made earlier. Obviously, the focus is monitoring around the Corcoran clay because typically that's where most subsidence occurs. But there was that heat map that showed, but let's just say change in elevation near in the east side area where the cone of depression is. Yeah. By doing it this way, are we precluding ourselves from watching out for subsidence in that area? Because there's the main canal, there's the Highline Canal, there's Turlock Lake, there's a dam, there's saddle dams, there's all kinds of infrastructure out there that, if there really was subsidence out of that area, could have significant adverse impacts. And then do we say, well, it's not an undesirable result because we're only worried about it if it happens near the Corcoran clay. So I just want to make sure that we're not, limiting the scope of our analysis just to make sure the entire subbasin is protected.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'm going to flip ahead one slide because that map that you're talking about is on my next slide. So when we're talking about looking at water levels, we know in the west that we don't want the potentiometric surface to get below the top of the Corcoran, right? But we don't have that same kind of benchmark in the east, right? We don't know, like there is no Corcoran in the east, so we don't know what level are we trying to avoid getting below. We don't know what that is. So I think that the best way to monitor for subsidence in the east is to keep our eyes on the INSAR data. We could also think about installing GPS monitoring stations in areas that we are concerned about, or extensometers. And so I think that water levels are less helpful in the east than they are in the west for understanding subsidence, because if the declining water levels in the east are causing the subsidence, we don't know where that compaction may be occurring, right? And going backwards, we don't really know if it's real, right? Again, it could be shrink swell of clays at the surface, like Milt indicated. It could be just changes in land surface elevation from plowing or changing in cropping. Or it could be subsidence from the pumping going on. We don't know, but water levels are less helpful for helping us figure that out in the east. But there are other ways that we can keep our eye on it.
Hey, Liz.
Yeah.
Liz, well,
hey,
thinking about that question, wouldn't the TM that we established for chronic lowering of water levels be more restrictive than the suggested TM for subsidence? In which case, if we did monitor water levels, we would hit one before the other. The one is more limited, is more of a limiting factor than. Am I saying that right?
So are you? Go ahead. Sorry.
The minimum threshold for chronic lowering of water levels would be encountered first in that eastern area than a TM that we might pick for subsidence, even though it's outside the clay.
Yeah, well, we don't know what, I think I see what you're saying. Well, we haven't developed MTs for chronic lowering of water levels yet, right?
Right. But I'm just saying, based on our preliminary discussion, we've been looking at picking the low water levels from the end of the drought, the 12-16 drought, like fall of 15 or whatever, is where we have been. And looking at the information that you just provided on the west side, where you had 100 feet or so above the top of the clay, I mean, it seems that we would never bring the water level even close to the top of the clay, because we would probably hit the restriction on the lowering of water levels first.
Right.
And so I was trying to translate how that might work on the east side.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think if we ever hit the MT, some of these, I'll go back a couple slides. So this well, for example, west of the city of Turlock. So where the potentiometric surface is more than 115 feet above the top of the Corcoran clay. If we ever drew the potentiometric surface down to the top of the Corcoran clay here, we would be worried about a lot of other things other than land subsidence.
Right. Yeah, right. We would have probably hit the MT for the chronic lowering of water levels.
Yes, exactly.
And we kind of have some, we know where the clay is. We have a potentiometric surface. We know the thickness of the clay. Then over on the east side, I was trying to see how that might help us.
Yeah, well, we're not, we don't have a water level MT we don't have water levels as a proxy for an MT for land subsidence in the east, because there's no Corcoran, right? We don't know what elevation could trigger subsidence if it is happening.
Yeah.
I think a safe bet would be, hey, let's not go below historical lows, right? But we don't know. There's no kind of, magic benchmark out there.
Right. Well, I was just thinking out loud, that's all.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. Your question makes a lot of sense. It's a little trickier in the east.
Well, and we have to make sure that it's inelastic and not elastic, because we have a lot of elastic subsidence that really isn't a harm in a lot of places. I know in the South Valley, it just bounces right back. And so as we monitor it, we need to make sure it's an inelastic thing.
Yes, that's a really good point. Yes, that is absolutely true. And that's why, again, the importance here is to, although I've, focused just now a lot about on water levels, going forward, it's not just about water levels. It's about keeping an eye on the INSAR data, keeping an eye on the Bureau of Reclamation monitoring point. And that's a segue into monitoring strategies, which is one of my last slides. So, looking towards the future, yes, we are proposing MTs for water levels as a proxy within the Corcoran clay for wells that are screened below the Corcoran clay. But in addition, we need to keep looking at the INSAR data. We need to ground truth it. We need to keep looking at the Bureau of Reclamation monitoring station, which is located right here. And the subbasin can consider, like I said earlier, installing GPS stations in areas that are sensitive or that want to be explored more, extensometers, there are other ways to monitor. So it's going to be sort of a multifaceted approach, because you're right, we don't know, if it's what we're seeing is inelastic or elastic in any of these places. None of it is very significant right now, but we will, of course, keep our eye on it, and we'll learn more about it with time.
Liz, this is Valerie. I had another question about that INSAR data.
Yeah.
Is that, how often does that, it looks like it covers the whole subbasin to me.
Yes.
And it's obviously, you mentioned from kind of satellite imaging. How often does DWR run that? How often do you get numbers? Does DWR feel more confident in it than maybe you guys do? Or
that's a good question. I don't know. So they run it. I think there's data twice a year. Go back. Sorry. I don't know if I have that. Yeah, I don't have that. I am not sure. It's certainly not continuous. I think it is twice a year, maybe 3 times a year, but I think it's twice. And they will continue to do it. Again, it's DWR has contracted with this company, Trey Altamira, to do the processing of this data that's coming from these European satellites. I don't know if DWR, what their confidence level is I think they have this as, they present this data on their website. So I think they, obviously they want people to use it. But just from our experience, especially Phyllis's experience in the current subbasin, we think it's good for screening and needs some ground truthing, because there's, it's each pixel, I think, is 100 meters by 100 meters. Saw some squirrely, I think Phyllis saw some squirrely things in the current subbasin. And when they went out to the actual field to kind of take a look, it didn't really jive with what they were seeing on maps. So it's the kind of thing, it's easy to kind of take a look and see what the data says. And if there are areas like this near the edge of the Corcoran or the eastern subbasin that you have questions about, then you take the next step and try to ground truth it.
Thanks.
Sure. Back to.
So Liz, sorry, one more question.
Okay.
Going back to the other slide.
Which one, the INSAR?
Yeah, the one you were just on.
Okay.
It looks like there's a spot, and it's just an oddity where there's like right by your arrow, or
right here.
Oh, that's my arrow. Yeah, the red.
Yeah.
That was even deeper than the other, or
yeah,
more of
a little bit by 0.05 feet, which is not a lot. The difference.
Tiny.
Yeah, I can't explain it. I can't explain it. It's just a little blip.
Yeah. Okay.
The colors on that are strange though, because really, am I seeing this right, or am I crazy? That 0 is the gray. Oh, but the yellow and then the pink. And so the red is more,
Yeah, more subsidence.
more subsidence than the other colors. Okay.
Yeah.
And it has a little place by it that's that kind of darker peachy red color.
Yeah.
Like it's not the pink, but it's not the red. It's that in between one.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even refer to it as subsidence. It's just a higher value assigned to that particular pixel for vertical displacement of some kind.
Yeah. And I think, again, that's also something to keep in mind when talking about subsidence. It's more of a, I mean, you're not going to get subsidence here and then, 1,000 feet away not have subsidence, right? I mean, it's more of a regional thing. You're not going to, it's not like
One little spot.
right. It's not a sinkhole.
And that's the reason why I brought it up. It's like it raises questions about this may be too accurate, maybe, it's like maybe there's other things. And so it's a useful tool, and we need to figure out how best to use it and articulate that in the GSP and our plan moving forward with respect to that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's very sensitive. I mean, you're seeing, most of Turlock is less than 0.6 inches. I mean, think about how little that is, right? Less than almost half an inch over 4 years. It's detecting really, really tiny changes in ground surface elevation, really, really tiny. So again, it's better to be more sensitive than not sensitive enough, right? But it's up to us to, kind of make sense of it, right? Certainly don't want to look at this map and go, oh my gosh. No, we need to check it. We need to ground truth it. Again, this is a screening tool. That's why we are suggesting other means for monitoring also. So I will flip forward. It's easier to do it this way. So next steps. Needless to say, we are all very busy. So we're going to continue working on sustainable management criteria. We'll be working with the ad hoc committee and the TAC on other sustainability indicators and continue to share information during the TAC meetings. We'll be working on the monitoring network. We'll be working with the West Turlock Subbasin GSA and the East Turlock Subbasin GSA. Modeling analyses. The team at Woodard and Kern is currently working on the climate change scenario model. And I think they'll have some results to share with us later this month. And following that, they'll be working on the initial sustainable yield scenario. And then, of course, we'll be working on projects and management actions. We'll be coordinating with the outreach committee on the revised schedule for GSP chapter rollouts. And we'll be using the revised schedule to develop future topics for meetings, continue with GSP chapter development, including the appendices for the model documentation and outreach. And so that is all I have. Any questions?
Liz, this is Kevin Kaufman.
Kevin.
I think we had some really good questions today, and I want to compliment those who brought them up, Valerie and Mike and Walt. I'm a little concerned about the buffer and the concept. In concept, I'm concerned about it, and then I'm also I like the fact that Valerie mentioned that the state PWR is really looking for a rate, and I really like Walt's idea of just looking at this logically as to, hey, we're going to be having other MTs for chronic lowering of groundwater levels. Maybe we hold off on this until we have a little bit more information about those other MTs. And come in and say, because I think we all know that subsidence is not going to be a controlling indicator here. So I just wanted to give you my thoughts. I think it was a great discussion today. And I just don't think it's worth debating at this point until we start debating some of the other MTs. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kevin.
So with that, we had on our agenda an action item, and it seems like, I think generally there's understanding that with the information we have, there's no better way to analyze subsidence other than the INSAR data and then truth check it with groundwater levels, and that may be a kind of indicator of what's going on. But I take the point that Walt and Kevin mentioned that we're going to work on groundwater levels and other SMCs. So, but given that, I'm thinking for Liz, while the direction may not be clear as crystal, we're not saying go off and do something else, Liz, or come up with, we need you to look at, do other research or come up with a different program. So in some respects, keeping where we are today, sitting on it for a couple of weeks or whatever while we work on some other things may not necessarily be a bad thing. It's obviously, it was always great to have something, check it off the list and move forward. But on the other hand, if it's like, yeah, this is probably as good as we can get right now, we'll work on some other things, we have to come back and revisit this rather than close it up permanently right now. And what does the rest of the group think? I guess my concern is we vote right now, so this is how we're going to do it. Then we learn something else 6 weeks from now. We're going to come back and change what we decided today, potentially.
Well, I can say, in terms of this presentation, I don't think that we're going to have new information in the next few weeks.
Right. On subsidence for sure.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
You did a very good job, Liz.
Yeah.
Thanks, Walt.
Yeah, I think I mean, I don't think we're asking for, like Michael said, more information. I think because this does kind of have a nexus with the water level, MT and what have you, it might make sense to hold off and wait and then kind of wrap it all together so we kind of see the bigger picture. But this kind of moves us forward with an understanding about what the recommendation is. If it were just the subsidence. So thank you so much.
Sure. And again, in terms of the MTs for chronic lowering of water levels, the point that Walt made earlier, I think will be true in a few weeks also, and that is, the MT for land subsidence using the water levels as a proxy will, be different probably, right, than the MT for chronic lowering of groundwater levels, because for the MT for land subsidence, we're really just concerned about where the Corcoran is. And especially in the Western Subbasin where the depth of the Corcoran is so deep, of course, we're not going to be setting the MT for chronic lowering of water levels at the top of the Corcoran. But yeah, I mean, it's up to the group, and we can revisit this when you're ready.
Hey, Liz, you mentioned in the western portion where we wouldn't set the chronic lowering of groundwater levels so deep. Is there an issue in maybe the eastern side of where the Corcoran clay starts to thin out, where we wouldn't set the chronic lowering of groundwater levels so shallow, where the subsidence level would actually be the controlling groundwater level rather than the chronic lowering sustainability indicator? Is that a potential?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think that let me go back.
Or you would dewater the superficial aquifer, but then we won't do that.
Yeah, but the MT, certainly the edge of the Corcoran where the potentiometric surface is closer to the Corcoran, the difference in MT between the chronic lowering of water levels and land subsidence would be closer to one another, right? Also, for the MT for chronic lowering of water levels, we'd be using water levels also above the Corcoran.
Yeah,
So that's a difference too. Here, we're focusing on water levels measured below the Corcoran.
A different variable could become the controlling factor.
Right.
Liz, how thick is the Corcoran clay in the CERES picture you're showing here?
Yeah, well, in this location, I can tell you exactly. I looked at the log yesterday. So the Corcoran is in two parts here. It's about 18 feet thick from about 136 to 154. And then there's actually a sand for about 11 feet from 154 to 165. And then there's another 20 feet of Corcoran from 165 to 185. So again, this is near the edge of the Corcoran where it's less competent and less continuous than it is further to the west. And so we're seeing that here. So we're seeing two 118-foot and 120-foot thick Corcoran separated by about 11 feet of sand. And so the top of the Corcoran elevation that I have on this chart is the top of that first piece that we see in the log, our first body.
You showed a similar figure for the area, I believe it was near Denier, right?
Yeah.
And there you said that it was also kind of lensy now and it was like 20 feet thick. And the elevation they took looks like it's only, I don't know, 14, 13 feet above. And if they recently took that, right, that was like a March 5th, that would be kind of like our high water level versus our low. Our low would be like in October, correct? So there's potential that this water level actually gets lower than this 13-foot mark.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It could have been, and we don't know. When we were looking at this area here, where kind of where the Corcoran bulges out a little bit, we were seeing that water levels could be close to the top of the Corcoran clay there. But we're not sure because we don't have a good well there yet. But you're right that at this well, Denier's well, we have only one water level, and that's it was from a week ago. So we don't know what it was in the past. So it could have been lower.
And you showed us as you go, from one direction to another, the Corcoran layer separation from groundwater level increases. Is there areas where it could be even worse than what we see here, where the water level might actually be already underneath the clay?
Well, along the edges of the Corcoran, I'm going to go back to the cross section here. So the Corcoran clay is shallowest at the eastern edge. So along the edge of the Corcoran clay, where we have seen the potentiometric surface closer to the top of the Corcoran clay, that is the area where it could be the closest, in other places other than where we have the well. So along the edge of the Corcoran clay, we would expect groundwater elevations or the potentiometric surface to be closest to the Corcoran. And as you move west, because the Corcoran dives and becomes very deep, it's less of it's much further away from the top of the Corcoran.
Yeah, and the last question, you keep mentioning you say it real quick, is basically it's the measurement they take is the pressure height, right, of the water?
Yes. Yes.
So, and that means that the well is perforated below the clay and pressurized.
Exactly. Yep.
So if we were to put a well, let's say well, I guess I'm just wondering what the true water level is in that area. Like if we started digging, at what point do you think we hit groundwater? Do you think the top has above it probably still has water, correct? We would have to get a well, I guess, cored all the way to clay and then see what the well level is in that one, just to see what it's above.
Well, so when you're drilling a well, let's say we're drilling a well in the Western Subbasin, once you hit the water table in the unconfined aquifer, it's going to be saturated from that point on.
Okay.
But when you get below the Corcoran clay, it's going to be pressurized.
Pressurized. Okay.
Yeah.
That's it. Thank you, Liz.
Sure. Anybody else?
Anything else for Liz? So just want to take the pulse of the group. Are you okay with taking no specific action right now? But obviously, I think Liz has done an outstanding job here, and we'll kind of loop back in as we work on water levels and other stuff that we're working on. Does that make sense? I just want to make sure it makes sense to everybody.
Hey, we got seawater intrusion and subsidence done.
Pretty much. All right, so it's okay with the group not to take action right now. First off, I want to thank Liz for outstanding presentation. When I understand it, Liz, you know you've done a good job, right? So I was always told to write to a 6th grade level. You did a great job there. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to number 7, Sigma related updates. We've got a couple here, public outreach and the grant. So Herb, are you up on the public outreach?
Yes, and I'm going to share, I don't know if I already shared my screen yet or not, but what I'm going to do just quickly, I have one quick item, and I will find it here. If I linked it or not, I did. We will be having our, I think I want to say our 4th, I want to say, groundwater lunch hour on March 26th. I zoomed out a little bit, but on March 26th from 12:30 to 1:30. We've always had these as kind of open-ended discussions, and of course, we're going to always take questions and let people ask any questions they want. It's their time. But now, as we move forward with the GSP draft sections getting developed, if they are available at that time, which we think they might be, then we could have that be kind of the topic of discussion amongst people attending the call. So chapters 1, 2, and 4 would be, or sections would be slated to be a headlining topic of that, along with a few other things that are timely. So that's the one piece I wanted to mention for the public outreach update is we have that going on, and we'll have staff on hand, and we'll just try and keep these going every month or so, especially as we start moving further along in the development of the draft sections of the GSP. And so that's the one item I have to present today, and happy to take any questions or let anyone else mention anything if I missed anything.
Any questions for Herb? Thanks for that, Herb. And I think I'm there on the 26th, right? It's my turn in the hot seat.
You're our technical expert.
Yeah. After what I just told Liz. So
unless anyone else comes in that has better credentials, it'll be you and me, and I definitely know that means you.
Well, hopefully the kindergartners are back at school. They can pull in.
True.
Okay. Moving on. Grant update. Debbie, do you have anything?
Just a couple things. The first is that we just recently submitted our more recent invoice to DWR, so we should have that back in a month and a half or so. So that will be helpful in keeping us solvent. Although no, we don't have a problem with that. We have been fine. So I wanted everyone to know that, and then I also wanted everyone to know that Liz and Phyllis have been working on developing further refining our schedule so that we'll know the topics kind of ahead of time, hopefully, for each of the TAC meetings and what have you, and we'll start sharing that once Phyllis gets back next week. So the idea is that people can kind of be prepared for these conversations, and we'll work through the ad hoc on items, as we move through in preparation for the TAC meetings. And so there's a lot more planning in the background that is happening that I think will be helpful as we move through the last, few months of this process. So I just wanted to kind of share that as well. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, but that's all I had for you today.
Hey, Debbie, will there be any member cash calls or admin dues coming up? We're doing our third quarter budget adjustments, and I'm getting hit with all sorts of questions about future payments that might be coming And I know that the West Turlock has, I think it's 10,000 member dues admin annual.
Yes. Go
Can
ahead.
you speak to that at all? Or what might be coming up over the next 3 months? If anything, maybe not.
So we are working with Phyllis to get an estimate for the annual report that we'll need to prepare for April of next year. And so we'll need to budget for it this coming fiscal year. And she has said that she will have that at the end of the month. So so there's the annual dues. There is the annual report that needs to be prepared. Yeah. Likely the GSAs will also need to be able to plan for responding to comments and those types of things as the GSP goes through the DWR process. So we may need to plan for that. And perhaps better how that is going in other subbasins. I'm not familiar with that, but it's those types of things that would be incorporated into the budget, much less whatever projects may be identified through the GSP process. And I don't know, Valerie, you kind of sat up, so maybe you have something to say with respect to that.
No, I have nothing to add.
Okay. So I don't know if that helps, Walt, but but that's kind of gives you an idea.
Be a future agenda item, perhaps, for nail it down.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But what you could do is reach out to Michael Clipper and let him know that what the timing is for you, and if there are other agencies that are looking for this as well. I think we're moving forward with getting some numbers, but we don't have them ironed down yet.
Maybe Debbie will circle back with Michael and see how quickly we can get out kind of a future budget type stuff. That'll be good. Thanks for that question, Walt. All right, that brings us to the end of our meeting. Our next special meeting is Thursday, March 18th. Did anybody remember what's on the calendar for that one? Or are we going to have it? Debbie, do you remember?
Hold on just a minute. My husband just got home, so he's busy doing stuff. The 18th, we had planned for a special meeting. The technical team will not have a presentation at that time, and so we're working through determining if there are more policy-related type things that we need to work through, and if so, we would propose having the meeting on the 18th to do that, so that we can focus on the technical issues in the other meetings. So that's the idea. So we're trying to keep it on the agenda or on the calendar at this point, but we'll let you know more as we know more.
Right. Sounds good. Okay, and with that, I will take a motion for adjournment from the West Turlock GSA TAC.
I'll make a motion, Michael.
Okay, so I heard from Miguel, and I'd say second from Debbie. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, West Turlock is adjourned. East Turlock, over to you. I wonder if they've already left for their TAC meeting. Looks like it. So East Turlock is adjourned too. See you Thursday 18th, maybe. Okay, keep in touch, everybody. Stay safe. Thank you.